Should we start?
Ramesh, we can start.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Welcome to episode 38 of Guru Manthan. Good evening, namaste, and thank you for joining us again on this, the 30th edition of a series of 50 discussions with educationist thinkers that's been happening every Saturday. The Guru Manthan talks, as all of you know, are being organized under the aegis of the Vivekananda Institute for Leadership Development, VLEAD, which is an initiative of SVYM. VLEAD is focused on developing human and social capital for nation building by enhancing the potential of individuals and institutions across the development sector through sustained engagement across four sectors, namely the government, NGOs, corporates, and the community, especially the youth. And Guru Manthan especially is a platform for teachers to share, discuss, debate, and learn about diverse perspectives. And we've been bringing the who's who of people from across the world. As always, the format of the talk would be that the speaker would speak for about 25 minutes, followed by a moderated Q&A, where Praveen and I would be picking up questions from the chat box as well as some of our own questions. And this would be for about 20 minutes, and then there would be conclusions from the speaker. Today, it's a privilege and pleasure to have Dr. M.R. Sitaram as our guest speaker. Dr. Sitaram will be speaking on inclusive and equitable education and the need to go beyond just addressing the removal of physical barriers. Dr. Sitaram is a consultant orthopedic surgeon at the Vivekananda Memorial Hospital. In addition to being one of the founding members of the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, SVYM, Dr. Sitaram has also been actively involved in the development sector for over 3 decades, spanning the areas of water sanitation, community-based rehabilitation of people with disabilities, inclusive education, among several other topics. It's a pleasure to have you, sir, and over to you.
Sir, you'll have to unmute. Yeah.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for this opportunity to share some thoughts. It's great to meet so many people. It's been quite a traumatic time for all of us. So it's that way a privilege to be able to connect with so many people across different geographic areas. I'll be sharing some thoughts about equity, inclusion, education, and what's the connection between possible connection between these thoughts, these aspects. And as Ramesh mentioned, we will keep time open for question answer to the extent possible. So I have a PowerPoint presentation which I'll be sharing, and I'll try to run through the presentation as quickly as possible so that we will have more time for discussions. And any question that might come up, please feel free to put in your points as in the chat box, or when it's important, also unmute yourself as feasible, and perhaps ask your query as well. So let me start yeah, can you see the screen? Yeah, okay. So in the next few minutes, we will explore some concepts of what equity is and what equality is, and is there a difference between the two? What do we mean by inclusion? And whose responsibility is it to make sure that there is equity and inclusion? What could be the main challenges? And when we apply this to education in the next part, what could be the barriers? Who are the important stakeholders who benefit? And what, as teachers, can we be doing? Now, it's a beautiful picture, beautiful photograph, and what you see predominantly here is lovely nature. We all appreciate beautiful scenes, beautiful scenery, and you see predominantly green. But then what is all the more striking is that there are so many shades of green. Even in that one green, there are so many shades that you cannot count. It brings us to the reality that diversity is the rule in nature. You see so many things around and not two things are alike. You see these pictures and common sights. In the upper part, in the first photograph, you see so many fruits, so many varieties of fruits, but you pick up one fruit, there are so many of them. Vegetables, there are so many vegetables, not one is like the other. And even if you just pick up one of them, let's say the potatoes here, not one potato is like the next one. So each entity, we all know, has a speciality of its own, a unique place in the overall scheme of things. Now, having accepted this, that there are this diverse entities in nature, we also, as human beings, have a strong tendency for stratification, for classification, for hierarchy. Even in this photograph, you see that all the apples have been arranged together, all the oranges have been arranged together, all bananas are hung together, all chilies are in one place, all potatoes are in one basket. There is a tendency to stratify them, to separate them out, and perhaps look at what I gain from it. Now, this is an important component which we have to understand when we talk of equity in the society, we talk of inclusion in the society. There is this inherent tendency for labeling. And what do we label? We label virtually everything. We label people. We label tall, short, fat, fair, dark, good, bad, everything. We label things, useful, useless, harmful, harmless. We label places, beautiful, don't go there, such things. We label situations. We label situations as dangerous, etc. All these labeling leads us to a convention of understanding of certain norms. So that is the origin of what we call norms. And therefore, we define certain things as being normal. And that said, we also associate this with certain abilities. Now, for instance, a person having 2 feet is normal. A person having 2 ears is normal. Therefore, any deviation from this obviously becomes abnormal. So if I don't have my second foot, I'm abnormal. If I can't, if you don't see my second ear, I'm abnormal. Related to this physical appearance is the ability. Feet are for walking, ears are for hearing, eyes are for seeing. So if you don't hear with your ears, that ability not being there is abnormal. We always tend to calculate so many things, equate so many things in our mind, that we have our own understanding of certain things which are normal, which are abnormal, which are abilities and which are disabilities. This actually leads to a strong superimposition of certain prejudices that we build right from our childhood, right from our early years. And some of these prejudices are extremely strongly deep-rooted and very difficult to change. My attempt, friends, would be to try and shake certain of these prejudices that exist in all of us. You, me, them, everybody. So in the next 25 minutes, I'll try to quickly share some of my thoughts, and maybe in the next half an hour, we will relook and look at ourselves and see what prejudices we have. What makes us do certain things in a particular way, which is perhaps not really equitable, not very inclusive. a lot of our actions are also built upon our expectations and our experiences. We want certain things to happen. If they don't happen it that way, then we don't like that experience. If a particular situation is not like what I wanted it to be, I don't want it to repeat. There is a role of conditioning, and in fact, a lot of our learning is also out of this sort of conditioned thinking. Like I said, we walk with our legs, and that is what is walking. There are certain stereotypes that we have been fed with. We often believe that women are to cook and feed the family, and so they stay home. They don't have to come out. A laborer is poor and illiterate, so his daughter can't really do well in studies, can she? No, because the parents are not from the right background. So this is what we need to challenge in our own outlooks first. Can we assume, or can you accept, that walking without legs is possible? Talking without speaking is possible. Now, it may sound a bit of a challenge for many of us who are not exposed to these thoughts, but I hope the group that we have would already be exposed to this, and so it would be easier to take this thought forward. Equally importantly, it's not just about our own feelings and our own views. We are the ones who shape the community. So we are teachers, we sculpt the community, and therefore, can some of these concepts be transferred onto the community as well? So we come to the first question that I thought I will talk about. What is equity? What is equality? I wish we had more time and opportunity for making this interactive, but given the limitations, I'll continue with the unfortunate monologue. Equity, equality are often confused. Equity I define as a value, as an attitude, whereas equality is more about mathematics. You have 10 people, you have 5 apples, give half to each of them is equality, mathematics. Equity is when I look at who needs how much and give according to the need. Equity is the ability to recognize diverse needs. I may not like apple, so I don't want it. Another person may like it so much that he wants the whole. So, can I recognize that diverse need? Can I recognize the diverse contributions that each people make to a particular situation and respect it irrespective of who makes the bigger contribution? Equity is about the ability of identifying true worth and respect that worth. It is the ability to accept unconditionally as is and varies without preconditions and move ahead with what can be done with that particular situation. Now, equity and inclusion generally always, in fact, go together, because once you have that sense of respect for every person that you see, you feel one. There is a beautiful Subhashita which says, Ayam nijaha paroveti ganana laghuchetasam udara charitanam tu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. It means I am nijaha, this person is mine. I am paraha, this person is somebody else or doesn't belong to me, is a thought process of the mean-minded people. People with large-heartedness do not have these separations. They have the feeling that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the entire earth, is one family. So that is inclusion. So once you have that sense of equity within you, inclusion becomes automatic. So inclusion is the sense of belonging, sense of respect. Inclusion is a philosophy which embraces the idea that everyone has something of value to contribute and everyone has a right to belong. So with this background, let us look at what we exactly mean by equity. Now, I'd like all of you to, put on your thinking hats and see what is visible on the screen now. You see a picture, there are 2 kids, fruits, maybe mangoes. I love mangoes and this is mango season. Mangoes falling down, one child is enjoying and the other child wants, but it's not getting it. And that is inequality. So we need to correct that we need to give some mechanism of support for both the children. So what do? We give ladders to both children. Now, has the system improved? No. What has happened is we've given equality, equal size ladders to both children, but we see that one kid can access the fruits, the other can't. And so what do? We have to change according to the need. And what do we have now? We have equity, where the child who needed a bigger ladder has got the bigger ladder and therefore has access to fruits. But then there is something beyond it, which is called justice, wherein we look at the system. I don't know how many of you really noticed that this tree is bent towards one side, and the child standing on that side will have access to more. And so correcting the system with some props, some policy modifications to make sure that opportunity to get fruits for both children are equal is justice. So we need to move from a state of inequality to justice. So that is the movement that we have to see. And let's move on. So how do we understand disability? That's when we talk of equity, inclusion, and inclusive education, the commonest condition that we think of addressing is disability, or persons with disability. Now, disability actually depends not just on the presence or absence of certain organs or functionalities. It depends a lot on the context, the environment, the expectations, and the individual capacities. Now, each one of these needs a lot of time to explain, but let's look at a real life situation. Now, let's look at a situation of running race. We all know Usain Bolt runs fast, but then so does Edward Kipchoge, who is the marathon runner who has probably created more records than Usain Bolt. Now, you ask Usain Bolt to run a marathon, I'm sure he will come second, because in that particular context of a marathon, despite his capacities as a sprinter, Usain Bolt is less endowed than Kipchoge. Similarly, singing, I don't sing well, but amid singers, I am a disabled person. So depending on these factors, friends, we are all disabled in one sense or the other. And so we should desist from this tendency to label certain people as disabled for life. Now, what do we do generally? How does this disability or the inaccessibility situation come up? How does this inequality come up? We have many situations that predispose to inequality in our society. They could be geographic, like the urban-rural divide. The place that you stay could be next to a forest where you are exposed to various dangers. Could be socio-cultural factors. You have this unfortunate social hierarchy, inevitable social hierarchy of castes and other things. There are gender stereotypes. There are socio-cultural norms, the educational backgrounds. And in this COVID situation, you have this digital divide, which is acting as a major hurdle. You have economic factors, and you have socio-political issues like conflicts, calamities, etc. Right? So apart from these, there are also specific demographic characteristics, like what tribe or what group you belong to, what communities you're talking about, what particular group in the community you're talking about, like maybe the girls or the adolescents, and the individual characteristics like we just now spoke, the persons with disability, the elderly, the chronically ill. So depending on all these factors, there is a tendency to keep certain people out of certain factors, and that includes education. Now, again, I'll quickly run through some thoughts. Education, what is education? We are all experts in that. But then I would like to recall what Swami Vivekananda says about education, of that being, the perfection already exists and it only needs to be manifested. There are many confusions and controversies. Let's not get into that right now, but it's important because there is an inordinate focus and weightage that is given to textbook learning in our system, exam performance in our system. So scoring marks versus doing well in life. What is the main purpose of education? So that is something that we have to understand. if we have to look at equity and education in its true light. Now, while these two are obviously linked inextricably, the common topic that I'm asked to address is about how do we bring equity or inclusion in education system, like i.e. inclusive education. How do we make that happen? But I also have an equally important component or a question or a challenge to pose. How can education ensure equity and inclusion in this society? Because that is perhaps one of the most venerable and holy tasks that the teachers do of building the society for tomorrow. And how do the teachers ensure that this sense of equity and justice is embedded in the children? When we started off working with persons with disability way back in the early 2000s, or maybe a bit before that, we were trying to get all children with disability into the school, but we were faced with a series of very similar objections. The same thing used to happen when we would talk to the tribals. So the general idea is that a person who is blind doesn't have to go to school. Tribals don't have to, you don't need a school for the tribals. Girls, after all, stay home. So why does she need to learn science? So there is a predominant and visible tendency for exclusion, despite all the slogans that we are, often hearing about universal education and whatnot. Now, there are certain questions that I thought would be very relevant for all of you to just think about and share your opinions, but let's move on. Time permitting, we will come back to this. But the important thing to remember and understand is that globally there is enough evidence from research that there are very, very serious, deleterious, dangerous consequences of exclusion. That exclusion consequences are not just limited to one individual who is excluded, as let's say an inferiority complex or a tendency to have adjustment problems and other things, but it also spills over to the entire community and creates a sense of incompleteness and inability to respond to situations as a community and not just as an individual. So globally, there were multiple situations in which this realization hit people. Now, there were the late 1800s where predominant exclusion was the rule. People would be excluded out, blind don't go to school, poor don't go to school, etc. So that was very similar to what you see in this picture. You have, you can see dots. All similar dots are inside and all the discolored or dissimilar dots are outside. Now that was the exclusion situation in terms of education. So no schools for children who are not normal or not to be included. Now that later on led to a situation where people realized the inherent worth of certain individuals. We had Helen Keller, we had people like people like Helen Keller who achieved so much in their lives despite their disabilities and strongly advocated for education for the blind or for other otherwise disadvantaged individuals. So the world said, okay, fine, let's have education for them, but then they are not normal. So what do you have? You have a special school. All blind children go to one school, all lame children go to another, hearing impaired another school. So you have separate schools for separate groups. But then the world later felt that no, that's not the way, because certain components of education or learning is not complete if before they mingle with the children of similar age group. And so you had this system of integration. But you notice here that though they are inside the large circle, they are still outside. Beyond that came the current concept of inclusion, where you see that without borders, seamlessly mainstreamed individuals is what we want. The Salamanca Declaration that came up in the 90s speaks about this sort of open and inclusive education system where every child feels respected, every child feels included. So inclusive education is a learning environment that promotes full acceptance of the child and full inclusion of the child in all aspects of its learning, personal growth, academic growth, professional development, etc. So all these aspects are important. But is it possible to implement it, and how do we go about it? I often think of a framework for this. There are certain factors which are enablers and disablers. The needs of an individual, let's say a child comes from a tribal background, that child's background and the needs will be different from, let's say, an urban child. So that sort of individual variations, the beliefs, values, and practices, affordability, etc. You have the environment which embeds this entire system, like the family, the society, so many other issues. And then you have the provider system, the education system itself, which includes the human resource, the attitudes of the people within, the infrastructure and the facilities that the system has, and the system and governance issues. So inclusive education has time and again proved that it is beneficial, not just to the person who is left out, but to the entire environment. Now, I often interact with the families of children with disability, the tribal families, and the teachers who are involved in teaching these children. I also have the opportunity to mingle and play and act out with the children themselves. So I can personally also vouch for the fact that this sort of inclusive environment is of benefit for not just the person who is excluded, but for the whole environment. So that means that the child with disability or marginalization benefits, and so do the other children, by the mere fact that they mingle with persons who are marginalized. So there is a strong life lessons that the other children learn. The school benefits, the family benefits, and most importantly, many teachers have come back to me and told me that, sir, I have changed after I dealt with this child. My teaching methodologies have changed. I have grown. So that is something that we need to remember. So there are certain philosophical approaches where you look at all children as equal, and providing opportunities for academic and social achievement becomes more important than just a single mode compartmentalized measurement of performance. So certain factors which we may perhaps come back to, but the guiding principles of inclusive education, just to touch upon some of them, one important component that we have to remember is that any of these marginalization situations, like a disability or poverty or gender bias or whatever it is a social responsibility and not just of an individual. So if a tribal child doesn't get educated, it's the system failure and not of the child. So if we can have the right sort of attitude, then we can make sure that there is education for all, protection of all rights, and move on to a situation where there is inclusion. Now we have to be realistic. While full inclusion is indeed a utopian dream, it's a dream, but perhaps utopian. We need to accept there are certain situations where the realities play out in such a way that full inclusion is not possible. So given our situation, we have to practically look at what can be done to ensure that at least there is part inclusion in physical, social, and functional domains, so that the abilities and the inherent talent of children are given an expression. Now, how does this play out? What does this mean? I often ask children and the teachers and the parents, what do they feel? Because that feel is extremely important. And if a child says that I'm comfortable, I'm happy, I'm cared about, and I'm appreciated, then those are the expressions of inclusion. On the other hand, if a child says, I cried this morning, then it's exclusion. I want every school to be able to say, that my children come to school on time. Every child comes to school on time. And no child in my school should say that I was not allowed to play on the seesaw or the slide. And every child should hear these encouraging words of, wow, you have done well. Come on, you can even do better. So that is inclusive education. There are several barriers which perhaps we can discuss in the subsequent half an hour. But most importantly, you see, we have the physical environmental barriers, which are the most visible ones, like, creating a ramp so that the child can access a next level. But that is perhaps one of the easiest to handle. There are so many other barriers like the information barriers, communication, transport, financial, system and policy barriers. But if you see, I have put attitude barriers as a separate group, because if you can address the attitudes, then all other barriers are surmountable. So some thoughts on what the teacher can do. A teacher has a huge role to play with the child, with all students, with the family and the community. So there are some thoughts gleaned from my experience of what we can perhaps try to do differently. The most important responsibility of the teacher, in my view, is to build a sensitivity of equity and inclusion and justice in a child. So that's extremely important, and that can be done only by being equitable and inclusive. Often families are difficult to handle, and it's often felt that they don't cooperate, but it's important that we make them partners in what we do, and appropriate teaching learning materials and classroom management will go a long way in making sure that a marginalized child feels included, and a sense of belonging can be brought about, and a sense of achievement can also be brought about. That includes modifications within the building. We in our experience, we have seen that water sanitation facilities can go a long way in promoting inclusion. Curricular and extracurricular activities, extremely critical, but the tendency to overburden the children with curricular activities and neglecting the core curricular activities would perhaps be inappropriate when we talk of equity, inclusion, and inclusive education, because each child's abilities will be different, and recognizing the ability of the child and encouraging the child will be of great importance. So an hour of interaction in a classroom often doesn't teach much, but the children learn by picking up what we do rather than listening to what we say. So the important thing I feel is to be role models, and I'm sure all of you are indeed that way, good role models. And I'm sure if we can all have this philosophy and actually live this philosophy, then we'll surely be able to create that equitable society. So I think I'll stop my sharing now, and we will open up for discussion.
Thank you, sir. You did answer multiple questions which are coming up in the chat box. Just to kind of start off and maybe club multiple questions which are also coming here, is with respect to curriculum. When we have some fixed desired learning outcomes which are fixed for a class, let's say when they are age appropriate, and then there is a textbook or a syllabus which is designed for that learning outcome. Many times we are kind of stuck with those 5 subjects or 6 subjects and the syllabus that needs to be covered. Now, how do we empower our teachers to say that it is important to go beyond the textbook, beyond that syllabus, and actually help all the students reach or achieve their learning outcomes, which are not just age appropriate, but also student centric?
Yeah, this is one of the most common challenges that we have, and perhaps one of the regions where we need a very strong change in mindsets. That fixation to textbooks, fixation to certain learning outcomes are extremely deep rooted, and we need to change that. Now, you said age appropriate, and that is extremely important. And it's not just about chronological ages, it's also about the intellectual abilities of a particular child. Now, in such situations, one example that I often give is of Sachin Tendulkar, who famously did not clear his 10th standard examination. Now, from a conventional academic assessment point of view, he is no good. He didn't pass his exam. But then a year or two later, the state board actually included his lesson in the textbook for 10th standard. So you look at how much of an achievement there was because that sticking to or limiting to certain learning outcomes was not done. So who knows, in the group that I am teaching, there may well be a Sachin Tendulkar who is not able to do well in math, but is able to do well in certain other things, certain other aspects of learning. So while there is a very real pressure on the system and on the teachers to generate the right sort of results at the 10th standard level, pass percentages, we need a system change or a attitudinal change in this regard. And we need to look at education in its holistic aspect and incorporate the other aspects apart from the marks and the 5 subjects that we have. There have been certain attempts in this, both in CBSE, especially in CBSE, not so visible in the state board, but definitely there is a move towards the greater focus on art, greater focus on music and sport. And the recently adopted national education policy also speaks about this. And therefore, maybe progressively we will have a situation where teachers are given that leeway, that rope to identify what the child is good in, and then stream the child towards that particular zone of achievement, area of achievement.
One follow-up question, sir. How important are semantics when we talk about inclusive education? We seem to be having a special beard when we have teachers who are trained to work with the kids, or we have learning disabilities, learning difficulties, but we don't talk so much about learning abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. It's somehow we have put the whole this thing in one crux. When I work in water sanitation sector as well, and one of the questions that comes up there often is of construction or a design of a toilet for the disabled. Now, the question that comes up is, should you have a separate toilet for the disabled and separate for the so-called normal? I firmly believe that any toilet that you build should be able to accommodate both the so-called normal and the disabled. So that is universal design. And in the same way, in teachers as well, while there is a need for some specialization, the core ability should be universal approach to education. Any teacher should be able to identify these nuances of ability and disability in any given situation and address those requirements in an appropriate way. So I feel that especially in the early age group, like let's say the lower primary section, we have situations where entire school has only one teacher. So that teacher teaches all subjects. So in the same way, that ability to teach and ability to interact should be not just limited to a particular set of children, but a diverse set of children who come with all the characteristics that we just now spoke about. But as we move ahead and as the children grow in their academic pursuits as well, we see that the modalities of learning differs. And there, you definitely need certain additional skills for the teachers and additional facilities in the school. Like, let's say a child with a visual impairment or a totally blind child. Now, up to fourth standard, with just inputs through hearing, the child may be able to learn certain things. But fifth standard onwards, there is a need for greater depth in what the child learns. And so maybe the braille and other such, or maybe low vision aids and other such modalities become important. And not all schools will be equally adept at that. So you do need certain level of specialization as you move along, but that has to be in a need-based, decentralized way with a clear system where you have, as we are right now proposing, a clustering approach where needs of similar children can be addressed in groups. So then, yes, we will be able to take care of the special needs as well. But to your question, I think this very attitude of equity is something that has to be inbuilt, that has to become our way of life, and not just be, otherwise, we will be falling into the same trap of labeling the BEds as special BEds, or maybe visually challenged BEds and mentally challenged BEds and some other, a dozen other names, but not get the right inclusion and integration that we really want.
One quick follow-up, sir. You mentioned about the lower primary schools actually being very inclusive and then adopting a approach later when the learning needs differ. But our present system seems to be going the other way around. There is integration and inclusion which is actually being practiced at much more easily at the higher education level. But we seem to believe that we need separate schools at the younger age groups. Why is it so?
Yeah, again, that stems from as we see the evolution of how these special schools came up and how they got sort of deep-rooted entrenchment in the communities. We see that around the 1940s, 1950s, up to 1960s, there was this very strong movement of creating special schools. Schools for the blind, schools for the hearing impaired, and that was from the basic education level to matriculation level, and it sort of stopped there. Higher education was not included in this ambit, and that has had a strong impact on the community psyche in general. So when we would go from house to house, identifying children who are left out with disabilities, the first question that the parents would ask is this: is my blind child going to be admitted to a blind school? It would be difficult for them to accept that the child can go to a normal school. And back in the school, the same attitude in the teachers, that blind schools are there for the blind and normal schools for the normal children. So I think that a strong, deep-rooted myth still persists, still exists. But when you look at learning as such, the primary thing that the child has to learn, or all children have to learn in the early years, is of social integration and certain enablers for learning. That mental, that ability to learn is what the child should learn first, not the learning itself, not the content itself. The ability to talk to another child, another person, ability to interact and be comfortable in a particular situation. Unless this comfort is sort of given to that child in the early age group, later on trying to integrate will become more difficult. Even when you look at the evolution of this inclusion, concept of inclusion, it was often seen that children educated in a blind school could do well in an academic setting. Let's say pass the 10th standard exam, but put them in a bus full of so-called normal, the child still feels uncomfortable and left out. So that social integration is something that has to happen, that emotional growth, something that has to happen early in a child's growth. And then as you move on, you will feel more confident of learning the bigger things. And then you will actually need certain special facilities. And the same thing is true even for our tribals, when we separate them out and keep them separate for a long period of time, let's say till their 10th standard or beyond, and then try to integrate them in a college in Mysore, we have seen that the children have more difficulties in getting used to the big crowd and whatever it is. So integration has to start as early as possible for the best social, emotional skills to develop. And once there is a strong grounding that the child gets of these abilities, academic learning can be supplemented with special skills like maybe the braille or a hearing aid, or maybe some modifications for a child with cerebral palsy. Such things can happen at a later date, depending on the abilities. Not all children need to go to a college or a polytechnic or a medical school. That fixation also needs to be broken. Depending on the child's inherent talent and ability, the child can be streamed to any specialty subsequently. So I still feel that integration at a lower age group is of extremely important extremely important requirement. And as we move ahead in the child's academic growth or professional growth or skill growth, you need specialization.
Thank you. I just had as I was going through your, what you were listening to, what you were saying, one thing is quite clear, that inclusion is a change process. But often the approach is more like an event.
Exactly.
Let's do one program where we let's become inclusive and all that. And the second aspect is at the level of the person who's going to execute it, the teacher. There is a need for a fundamental change in their own identity, as well as how they identify with the target audience that they are reaching. So is there how does a teacher approach this? What should the teacher do? And also, how do we ensure that inclusion does not become just
a
slogan, and rather
fad? Yeah, very true. I in all the sessions that I handle for the teachers about inclusive education, I don't know how many have already participated in that, but major part of my interaction will be about these attitudes, an introspection about what I feel about disability and how I label people in terms of abilities and disabilities. We do certain exercises where the statement that I made about each person being able or disabled in certain situations, that is very true. So how strongly can we accept that is the primary question. So if we are ready, if we have the humility, if we have the realism to accept that each of us have certain abilities, each of us have certain disabilities, then inclusion becomes easier. If we have strong prejudices, biases about normalcy and abilities, and we have strong expectations about outputs, then it becomes difficult. So the primary requirement would be to shake ourselves and look within ourselves and see if we can change our attitudes. Once that is done, then you see the children in a different light. You don't always look at certain performance indicators. You look at a multiple set of performance indicators, not just about the weekend test or the monthly test or unit test and how children are doing in which particular subject, but also incorporate how well the child sings, how well the child runs, certain of these so-called unimportant dimensions of growth, and see how best that can be encouraged. But it's not easy. It's a lot of our internal attitudes and makeup is influenced by what the society imposes on us. Last month we had a visioning exercise for all the special teachers of Mysore district. We had nearly 60 BIRTs of Mysore district at our place, and I was, taking them through a set of exercises for their own vision, activities, and all those things. At the end of it, the DDPI and the BEO were also there, and we were just discussing. But out of all these, high-sounding, aspirational discussions, the issue of 10th standard exam came up. Suddenly, there was this focus that there are some 35 children with disabilities writing 10th standard this year, and how do we make them pass? If they don't pass, the school's performance is pulled down. And so the attitude that some teachers had apparently was that let us leave those disabled children out. Let them not take the 10th exam itself, so that our school's performance shows up better. Now, I think that attitude is what is spoiling this whole system or attempt at getting inclusion into reality. So we need to, like I said, ask ourselves, what do we really believe in? And if we can shake that a little bit, then maybe this inclusion becomes reality. And it cannot be limited to one teacher. We have probably worked with more than 2,000, 3,000 government schools so far. And we have seen that unless there is a good leadership that allows this sort of contextualization, changes in the schools cannot be brought about. So it has to be a system change where it is driven from both ways, top down as well as bottoms up. Then we will get that attitudinal change. Then the true ability of a child can be recognized and respected, and that particular child can be streamed in the right direction as well.
Just had a follow-up question on that. In my limited understanding, I also think that inclusion also people with, for lack of a better word, disabilities would also mean that we also bring in teachers who have that kind of disabilities into the system. Do we? Because at least logically, we think that they would be able to better empathize with the similar groups or whatever. So in my limited understanding, I don't see much of that happening. Is there something that is being done or to be done on that?
You're right. Actually, it's one of the strategies that has worked for us in our community-based rehabilitation program for the disabled, where as peer educators, persons with disabilities themselves have been motivators of change or harbingers of change in the lives of families with such people. And I'm proud to say that many of our people who joined as mere peer educators have grown to become, occupy much higher responsible positions in the project and lead the project as well. And the same thing is very true for the education system as well, that on one hand, the teacher can empathize better with the children and respond accordingly. But equally important is that the child and the family is able to look at a person who has achieved something that is desirable, something that is respectable, and therefore there is an aspiration that can be set more easily than somebody unrelated going and saying that, hey, you can achieve ABC. If that person comes right there and says that, look, I am doing this, why don't you come along? Then certainly there is a much stronger motivation. So we need that sort of role models. We in our project, at least, we try to collect such stories and share those stories of successes, not really of just the global achievers, not of just Helen Kellers and other such big people, but of a local boy who has done well, a local boy from HD Kote who has become a first division clerk in High Court in Bangalore. That sort of achievements, which is touchable for me. I can do it. It's next step. So that sort of stories would be very powerful motivators. And including such individuals in the system is, I feel, a strong demonstration that we mean business, that we really mean inclusion. If the system itself keeps them out, then it's very, very unfortunate.
Yeah, there is a question from a social science teacher I think the question is that the Constitution uh, has within its principles, one of the governing principles is equality. But I think he also believes that the overlap between equality and equity seems to be very close. So when the Constitution talks about equality, what he's asking is, are we actually transacting equity in a classroom setting? And what were the founders of the writers of the Constitution thinking of when they spoke of equality? And where does equity fit into the context of the equality that the Constitution pushes?
Now, I think we go back to Praveen's question about semantics. I think the spirit behind that word is more important. And I have absolutely no doubt that the founding fathers of our Constitution really meant the spirit of equity and not merely of mathematical division of X resources into Y people and just distributing them and washing your hands off. No, that's not the spirit behind that word. Though the word has been used, the spirit is of equity and of justice. So even going beyond equity, how do you tweak the system? How do you reconstruct the system so that equity becomes inbuilt into the system and doesn't need a differential approach at all? So that sort of vision was what I think the Constitution founders gave us, and that's what we need to take forward.
A couple of questions, sir, clubbed together. One of the questions was, even in a so-called normal group, we do have equity issues.
Yeah.
And even in a normal classroom, we do have students who are far ahead of the group with, if you take any particular learning outcome. And I think they are also kind of missing out in what exactly a teacher can do for them, or a system can do for them. So eventually, if you look at what happens in a classroom, a teacher will have to look at 20 individuals and not as one class.
Yes.
Or 40 individuals and not as one class. So how practical would an approach, or how truly student-centric can such classrooms be?
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult question, particularly in our setting, in Indian setting, and all the more so in a rural or a tribal setting, which is what we have generally been exposed to. And so I can very well relate to this particular question. Both the first part of the question and the second part of the question. It's, like I was mentioning, this tendency to stratify, tendency to separate out is something that's very inherent in every individual. And you always look at what's in it for me. So every person tends to look at who is beneficial to me and who is not. And, this sort of grouping happens. And children, practice that as well. I have seen so many situations. And I'm sure I have experienced that as well, even in my class as a kid, where for whatever reason, there were situations where I was kept out, for whatever reason. There was, if I score very good marks, then I would be an outcast in some situations. Such things happen. So that is very, very real, which is why I was saying that it is important to bring in that sense of equity, sense of acceptance early in a child's growth. So the child has to be exposed to as many different capacities, as many different characteristics as possible, and be taught to accept them, not necessarily keep on differentiating them. So it's important that inclusion starts early. Now, the next part where we saw that a classroom of 20 is actually of 20 individuals is very true. Only thing is, in the rural areas, it becomes maybe 40 or 60. So when 60 kids and one teacher, it's a real nightmare. So that's a very difficult situation. So where there a practical approach that you're forced to take is of the least common denominator. Look at where all children seem to be doing well and focus at least on that. But having said that, while that is the usual approach, we also need to look at outliers, children who are not doing well, children who are doing exceptionally well. Now, I personally have seen that the greatest amount of focus is given to children who are not doing well, just so that you give them something that makes them pass the exam, push them to the next level and be happy about it. But in my view, that's a gross injustice done to the other end of the spectrum, children with exceptional abilities who need additional stimulation to grow to the next level. Though it's a tall order, I think it is doable given the right attitude and the right skill sets for the teacher. I'm sure we will be able to deal with this diversity within a classroom. The common minimum denominator does exist. We have to respect that. Like if the whole society looks at how many children passed 10th standard as one of the metric, we have to respect that. Okay, we will do that. But the society will change only when we show a better picture, only when we demonstrate that there is something beyond the 10th standard marks. So that can happen when a child who did not do well in 10th standard does well in music or some other form. And equally importantly, a child from a rural background has achieved something academically brilliant, so that there is adequate acceptance that the well-performing, high-performing children need certain special attention. So it's definitely a tall order, but I feel the way forward could be by taking a much stronger system approach. Each teacher doing certain things may be very difficult. So what I've been trying to suggest is teachers getting together and sharing their experiences in their particular schools and in their particular classes, and looking at what each other's experience can help. And maybe in a particular class, let's say a 6th standard of one particular village, there is a child who is exceptionally brilliant. There's very little that a teacher can do for that one particular child. But if that teacher speaks to maybe 10 different teachers in some context, and we get 10 such children, then there is certainly something that's possible to be given as inputs for these 10, which may not be possible for just one. In the same way, the slow learners as well. So, of course, our teachers already know this technique of mixing the slow learners, fast learners, using fast learners to help the slow learners. So that sort of mixing is something that's within the classroom often practiced, but it also needs a methodical approach, which many times I see not being followed. You just look at the marks as the indicator and not the abilities for this sort of grouping, which perhaps is not a very strong way of doing it. But if we can actually get that cluster approach and group children beyond a particular class also to these special learning environments, then I think we will be able to address this at a community level.
Radhika has a comment.
Yeah, namaste, doctor. It was a very comprehensive presentation. Just thought, a few things I will kind of add to what you're saying. You said it at the end, it is not very easy for a teacher or a group of teachers to handle this unless there is the will of the management to take it ahead. So it is purely a system approach that is going to help. So in this context, I thought maybe you're aware that there are 2 institutions in Delhi who have been, doing this for the last 3 decades or more. There is an inclusive school, completely inclusive school called St. Mary's in New Delhi, which is just because of the head of the school who was interested, and it continues to be one, and they have kind of handled the challenges very beautifully. So it's a completely inclusive school. All kinds of differently able children would be here, including the so-called normal children. And then there is this, originally, which was the Spastic Society of Northern India, had then converted themselves sometimes in the late 90s to call themselves Action for Ability Development and Inclusion, who broke down the wall. It was a Spastic Society run institution meant exclusively for the so-called disabled. They broke down the walls. They said it is going to be an inclusive school, and they continue to run an inclusive school. So in that context, what they decided was, when they have a teacher or a B.Ed with special education, they tend to think fractured, because they are used to having a special education background and they don't have a clue of what a normal education background is. I'm using all these in quotes, normal and all of that stuff. So they said, unless we have a healthy mix of the so-called normal B.Eds along with the so-called special B.Eds, that's when the system will work best. And it is going to be a heavy burden on the institutions, because we're going to have several kinds of adults who will be required for these different kind of abilities and different kind of challenges that these children will bring in, these two learners will bring in. Now, in this, having said this, I just want to ask you this. See, while we are giving so much importance to inclusion, and when we talk of inclusion, we are generally talking about children or learners with disabilities, right? But in this whole journey, we are forgetting that we are all, like you mentioned it several times, each of us is disabled or differently abled in some form or the other. It doesn't really matter whether we call ourselves normal or not normal. So in this whole journey, I'm beginning to see and wonder, are we excluding the so-called normals now? So the normals are getting a little excluded, and these days with the social media going and with the pandemic going and all kinds of crises going, I notice a lot of remarks saying, why don't so-and-so celebrity contribute to this? What is he doing with so much money? Why don't the Tatas do this? Why don't the Ambanis do? I don't know what is happening to the thinking. We are beginning to see that, these people are lucky, so let them do, and we can get away, because we are in the deprived category. We can get away with doing what we want to anybody. And so where is the sensitivity? Bottom line of inclusion is sensitivity. So it really doesn't matter who is able, not able. So when we are not sensitive at all. So I just thought if you could throw some light on that. Thank you.
Yeah, very right. First of all, thank you for giving those examples. That's very useful. While those two examples that are specifically dealing with persons with disabilities, we have also seen that sort of integration working very well with other forms of exclusion. Like we have a tribal school. When the tribal children are encouraged to mingle with the other school children, their growth and their abilities to express themselves is far higher. Their confidence levels get boosted up. So we have been trying to institutionalize this system of integration, though the school as such is labeled as a tribal school. That spirit is extremely important, and we need to take that forward. I completely agree with what you're saying about this overdrive about equity and recognition of the disability, etc., spawning a sense of mediocrity or an acceptance of mediocrity. Now that can never be allowed. I strongly feel like you do, that mediocrity can never be accepted, and not being able to do certain things cannot be an excuse for giving for getting certain privileges. If I cannot do well in maths, that's fine, but I need to recognize what I can do well, and I need to do well in that. So I feel that the system should be gearing up to identify such abilities and encouraging abilities, rather than covering up and saying that, okay, these people need not do certain things. There is that tendency also that comes up. Even in the academic, these things, we see that that easier way out is often taken. That if this child cannot do well in one thing, let this child do certain things and we'll push the child to the next level. So there is that tendency. I think the focus should completely be riveted on abilities, on skill sets being acquired, and on performance and outcomes. So that is something that's very essential, and that has to be ingrained right in the early childhood.
Can I just?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. I just ask one more question. See, the adults who deal with children with different abilities or with an inclusive system, they themselves seem to have low self-worth and low self-esteem, especially as a group community of teachers. And we see that their self-esteem is far lower than any other profession. So with such a low self-esteem, would confident students, or
yeah. Did I hear you right? Did you say that the teachers themselves have, in general, a low self-esteem?
Yes.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. That's a very unfortunate reality that we often see. Teaching at one time was one of the most revered professions, but it doesn't seem to be so any longer. We also run a teacher education institution, so we know what level of priority the youngsters place to getting into a teaching profession. This getting into a D.Ed or a B.Ed is perhaps the last priority. You after all opportunities are ruled out, all other colleges are filled up, and I did get into any other college. Okay, fine, let me get into teaching. So that does seem to be this thing, which is a reflection perhaps of our societal views about the teaching profession itself. That needs to be addressed. It has not been that way all along. Like I said earlier, and I believe strongly, teachers are extremely critical for the nation building, for building the right sort of society, and that definitely needs to be reiterated across the board in all possible platforms. So that is something that we need to collectively do at a change, tough change, not with an event, but as a process. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think one of the few sessions where we have gone way over time. I think one of the reason being, this is a topic that's
sorry about that.
No, I think the reason being the topic has been of great interest, and many people have been, the chat box is also burning up. I would like to, thank you, Dr. Sitaram, for a very insightful discussion on a topic, and actually providing us with practical and practicable inputs on how this can be institutionalized and taken to execution on the ground. So, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. And I also want to thank all the participants and those who have kept coming and who continue. I hope each one of you enjoyed it as much as we did. So take care, stay safe, and have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you, and see you again.
Thank you. Namaste.